Let us start with just a look at what kind of stuff they're trying to sell with Planetech V5.
For everything else we're going to talk about in this talk today. Now, it centers on data-driven, physically based rules that we aim to realistically emulate nature and its incredible diversity. Before we dive in a bit deeper, let's just recap on some of the things we already have on our planets. So here you can see our lovely atmosphere and our cloud rendering, which can provide some spectacular views. We have our on-the-fly terrain generation, which is no loading screens in our game, which we're very proud of. And then we have our scattering system that can populate these planets with many different diverse biomes. And we've been setting quality benchmarks for each of these biomes as we come across them one by one.
But what we have isn't perfect. This scene on Microtech, it looks great, but it's not getting the same density that you'd expect from a real pine forest. That's one of the things we want to solve. The other, if I take you to the other side of Microtech, you'd be excused if you thought we'd just turned around and looked at a different part of the forest. Why is that? Well, this is because currently our artists create slices of biomes in great number, and then they distribute them across the planet using humidity and temperature properties. Each slice looks great.
Okay, real quick. It's not hard to find an example of this. This is Planetech V4, I think. Yeah, this was V4. This was when they were getting ready to release the previous version of Planetech, which was right when Microtech was coming in, and you can get a really good idea of how this works, why they did this way.
Painting tools. So I can select our painting tool here, and the mode is set to surface, and you can already see like a little highlight on the planet. And that highlight basically tells me where I can apply color to. So if I just now randomly choose, for example, white, and increase the brush radius. I can just click into the planet once, and you see that the color is applied.
Now, what's determining the area that you're affecting? I mean, obviously, you're moving your mouse, and it's selecting different areas. We can see what areas you're selecting in the blue. But how is it determining what you're hitting, what you're not hitting?
Exactly. So the thing I just talked about, which is that very simple texture, that drives everything, is basically what is being highlighted here, and it's different portions of that texture. We can take a look at it right now if you want to. So, but before I do that, I can basically just go through and stroke in here one more time, so you can see that changes can be done quite easily and very fast. But it's good to take a look at the texture now. So now we're in a tool called Substance Designer, where we generate most of our content when it comes to ground materials, textures, and so on. It is entirely procedural, so you see like there are these large chains of operations going on, starting from noises, and then we start modifying them and stuff like that without going into too much detail here. But at some point, when we start with a simple noise like this one, which is a Perlin noise, when we go all the way to the right, where it basically shows the end result, because
it's like just a little view of how ridiculously complex the planet. They've gotten good at making them. I think it's one of the things they're most efficient at is making planets, but just seeing how many things go into like the base design of the planet.
This part here is the result of it. So we end up at something like this, or rather something like this, right? And so what are we looking at?
Oh, let me see if he explains it
here. I have talked about one texture, but we're clearly seeing two things. And what are these two? If I visualize it like this.
Toes.
So basically, I just took that grayscale information from here and applied a little color to it to make it a little more obvious what this is all about. What we're looking at is the temperature information of our planet. And to further visualize that, I can actually have it view on my sphere here. So let's say this is our planet. I'm trying to squeeze the windows that I usually have on two screens onto one screen. All right, but as you can see here, the texture, if I chose the grayscale version of it, right, you can see that the dark values of the texture are at the top and bottom of the sphere, which is basically our North and South Pole. And around the equator, also if I view this texture here, you can see that here, the top and the equator here, this correlates, right? Because it's mapped on the sphere right now. So around the equator, we have the brightest values, which means the temperature there is greater than it is around the North or South Pole, right? Mm-hmm. So we have kind of a representation of what the temperature is like on our planet, and also these deformations and such, because you don't want it to be simple. There are all kinds of things going on a planet, like mountains and oceans, and all of these things can influence how the temperature can behave on the planet.
Okay, jumping ahead.
Right? And then
so what I'm trying to highlight here is he's painting essentially it's a temperature humidity map.
Fantastic.
And I don't know if he just says that outright at any point here. He probably does, but this little map over here in the corner, you can't see it here. So this map here is a representation of the planet. And you could say top left-hand corner is like the top is cold, the bottom is hot, the left is dry, and the right is humid. So then you could say, okay, the driest, coldest area will have this kind of biome. And then he could paint the square like that here. The warmest, driest area will have this kind of biome. These are deserts and tundra. And then over here you have rainforests, you have swamps, you have cold and wet, so like just really snowy areas. And then in the middle you have generalized things. And what they can do is they can both color that square to change what different parts of that level of humidity and temperature would be there, and that will correlate to whatever point that is on the planet here. Or they can go and they can paint the planet because they visually see that they want something to be there, and then that will show up on here and it will do it for the rest of that planet.
I can determine where these things should go. And then if we go down, I can even go down to a ground level where, oh, this is dark now. Let me go to a spot where it's actually bright. So I can go down to ground level. Let's show it here. Yeah, go to all the way down to a ground level and then basically paint in quite detailed areas of snow where it sits and how it blends into the entire rest.
So to be clear, I believe that this is something they did by hand as he's showing, but in the time since then, they've progressed to the point where this is being automated. And as they go further and further, more of this stuff just gets built into the natural one-button click of building a planet. I mean, we saw them do that with rivers, where when they first started making the river, he had to track the whole river down a valley. And then by the end he was done with it, he would just click a button and the tool would read the planet and know where rivers were going to be and place them. I think that's what happens here when they're building these biomes out too. But this was always a really good video, I think, kind of just showing how this whole system worked.
Just editing one area that you're
Genesis is supposed to do this. It's supposed to do this based on data they pull from Earth and the Moon, I think. So it's supposed to work more logically.
It's something that people constantly have to remind themselves of.
Do you, coming at this from like a Photoshop standpoint, do you have the ability to mask off a section? Like if you want to change everything on a planet except for one.
There is another video that shows this in terms of the height maps.
It doesn't work on space stations. It's the planet sites.
So same kind of idea.
Absolutely not. And we have our strict rules and for our workflows to prevent these visual errors from happening, right? Because first of all,
we won't get too much into that. There was one more where I wish I could find where they just like really, oh, you know what it probably is? From CitizenCon. Biome on the range. Yeah, I think this is the one where they really specifically explain why this works the way it does. No, actually, I don't think it is. Ooh, I don't know where that video would be. Oh well, I think you guys get the idea. Let's go back to the new stuff. Oh, actually, before we go back to the new stuff, I can show the true teaser of Planet Tech V5 when they talked about what they wanted to do with it.
For planets is we want to be able to build them much easier, much faster, and we want to make sure they are truly unique. At the moment, our planets are unique. However, they are built from type of tile sets, like pre-built things that get mixed and matched together and blended in complicated ways so that you don't see the repetition. But it's not truly unique, not in the same way that the Grand Canyon might be, or the River Nile, or Mount Everest. And that's what we want. So to get that, we need to replicate the complicated natural processes on Earth, like geology, climate, erosion, and these things aren't trivial. So we've got three options. We've got offline tools, Houdini, Terragen, things like this. We could simulate all these processes in the engine. But we've started some R&D a few months ago on whether we can use machine learning to do some of this. So just to give you a quick idea of how that would work, or how it could work, if you just start with some random input here, it's just like some noise. We run it through a temporary simulation, so we can type of get a more reasonable
So this is the whole process that they were doing by hand, and now they're showing that they are working on ways to do this through machine learning.
Simulation at different altitudes and latitudes on Earth. And then what we do is we categorize all this into different biomes. So based on the temperature and moisture, you'd find out what is a desert, what is a forest. And this part is crucial. So this is the input for our machine learning algorithm. We could come up with this image any other way. You could hand paint it as an artist, or we could just randomize the noise to get a different set of images. And then what we do is we take the large data sets we already have from Earth, from Mars, and from the Moon, and we train it on exactly the same distribution, so biomes, so forests, grasslands, and things like this. And by training it on exactly the type of data we get in reality, we can take this and then push just that, and then we can get these lovely height maps out of it that tell us a really realistic distribution. You can see here, this is a height map, so the black areas are low. You can see all the little rivers and valleys. And this had zero art input aside from this image, which is a very nice result. It's early days. This is based on something called a custom diffusion neural network.
So that's what they were talking about towards the end of last year as their plans for Planet Tech V5.
What you're going to see is a vertical slice.
End of 2023, sorry. This is now end of last year, sort of the work that they put into it from there and where they're headed. And I think this is almost similar to what we just looked at with Starware, in that they gave us a look at what they wanted to do. It was all very much on the slides. Now we're getting to see something that's a little more in-engine. That's not to say this is anywhere near close, just that it's something they've been progressing on over time in sort of the background, and they're now starting to talk a little more about.
Development, it's very early stages, very work in progress. You might see some bugs.
Early stages. Early days, early stages, early phases, early times.
But that means it's only going to get better, so be excited. The number one challenge with planets in our game is scale. In no other context do you need a planet to look great from first-person perspective when you're stood among the trees. You need it to look great when you're in a spaceship at a quantum marker miles away.
True.
And everywhere in between. There are no loading screens, you see everything. We cannot afford for it to look bad in any of those scenarios. Let's start from a ground perspective. Demo number 1. Let's have a look. So, how do we make that? Thank you, thank you. So let's talk about first what's underneath it all. The ground. So, in our previous terrain shader, we just switched between different ground textures depending on climate and didn't really consider the unique properties of each type. Now, the terrain shader is based around 4 layers. We always first consider bedrock at the bottom of it all. Then, where appropriate, we add layers of soil of different types. We then add debris where appropriate, whether it be pine needles, dead leaves, etc. And then when it gets cold, we add snow. Each of these layers has unique shading properties and unique transitions between them. Because we do this all in one shader, we're able to achieve that as well as being performant. We can also use things like water saturation to darken and tint the soil and other properties to make it look more realistic. But that's not what filled most of the screen in that demo. That's the vegetation. Like what Ali said, we want to emulate the laws of nature. So in Genesis, we have rule sets for every asset that tells it how to respond to our rich data, whether it be soil type, water availability, temperature, geology, or whatever. We assess the viability and the vitality of each asset and compare them to decide what is likely to spawn in a natural environment. This automatically creates the cohesive environments that you saw in that clip. Not handcrafted anymore. No one has told those ferns and those pines to be like that. They each want to be like that. And that's what we're doing, multiple assets coming together to create a unique microbiome. What about trees then? Same thing. They have a larger requirement for space, they have a larger requirement for nutrients. That's how you see the distribution, and it's how it all works. Let's meet the flora that came together to make that forest, and have a look at some of their properties. Now, just to note, they are all going to look quite similar because we've already seen them in the same place, so they must be similar. So, building blocks, like grass and common grass, medium amounts of sunlight. We had ferns, see it's a much lower requirement for sunlight. We had salix bushes forming our own roof.
This is interesting because we've been aware of the whole temperature and humidity stuff this whole time, but they're actually bringing in a third variable now, I guess, for vegetation. Not really sure. Like, we've seen that they have a temperature humidity map. So these are 2 very tangible things. I'm wondering if there's going to be a third variable that goes on that map that can literally change the vegetation. It's what it sounds like they want it to happen, but like, how detailed can you get?
Building blocks, like grass and common grass, medium amounts of sunlight. We had ferns, see it's a much lower requirement for sunlight. We had salix bushes forming our undergrowth. And we had pines, of course, and multiple variations of pines. Diversity is driven by competition. Everything has ideal conditions, which affects its competitiveness. We also have additional control over this in the form of dominance.
Okay, I'm going to skip forward because we should look at their new scattering stuff. It's actually really, really good. And this is also something that we heard about last year when they were talking about kind of what they wanted to do in the future.
The GPU, which is probably the thing we get asked about the most, is our scattering system, which is what responsible for putting all the trees and the rocks down in the world. We're going to, again, move this to 100% to the GPU, and that should let us have vastly longer draw distances right up until the horizon and much better performance. So we'll finally get rid of the dreaded pop of trees coming in for you. We also have to integrate it with our harvestable system, the resource system, and the awesome fire system you just saw a minute ago.
So that's what we're about to look at. How is it that No Man's Sky has already achieved this in their game engine or something very similar? Theirs is very, very, very much more procedurally based, but over time they have also figured out good distribution, good scattering. I don't think those planets are nearly as detailed. I don't think they really follow a logical function quite like these do. And obviously they are dealing with a lot less assets, with things that get placed on the planet, with things that are scattered throughout, and with the number of players and people who are populating space on these planets. I also don't know if those are actual globes or if they're curved planes, which are kind of different. It's weird. I can't explain it. I'm not a game dev, but it's just a different system. That being said, Hello Games probably has something that is very advanced as well, and they've been building it for over a decade, so they've put a lot of time into it, and they probably have something that CIG can't match in their own way as well. Yeah, at launch it wasn't great. Now it's phenomenal compared to what it used to be. I mean, their water and fauna system, or their water and flora system, got great updates last year, but it took time.
Leaves from trees and have the grass wither in winter.
Right. There you go. It's because they've got seasons in this one. That is actually an interesting one because it's kind of hinting at the idea again that planets will have an orbit, reconfirming, I guess, the idea is like, are there going to be seasons? Will they factor in the orbit or what?
So as you're starting to see, all these rules, all this data, it's all coming together to create what we call truly emergent biomes. Let's have one more look at how this varies over a much larger scale.
Hold on, I think they actually show the scattering here. It's an insane difference. I don't want to miss it because it's actually nuts. The improvements that they're making on this engine from Planetech V4 to V5 is crazy. Anybody who was here from Planetech I want to say Planetech V2 to V4 because they went through the iterations quickly in the beginning. The first version of Planetech we got, let's just go back to that real quick.
Consummate flying skills.
Don't even get me started on the clouds. This is Hurston, by the way. I'm guessing you can tell by the dirtiness, but... So, to be quite honest, I think the shoreline is one of the weak parts of Planetech even now.
Engine team that does all the procedural planet stuff has been adding obviously a lot of stuff to the procedural planet tech. The oceans have all been ported over to GPU, and ultimately we're not doing it here, but you know, there actually has, if we get low enough, you'll probably see it's full wave simulation. And we get
whatever that means in 2017.
The wake from the ship creates waves. That's not in yet, but we will be doing that at some point.
And then Lorville back when it was tiny.
Kind of smog and factories and polluted air.
And then, you know, just landing and getting down and seeing the flora and fauna. Honestly, it looked pretty good for back then. But like, it's when you get to the details that you can kind of tell
again,
it's not as good as now, the way that the assets, the plants are placed and stuff, the scattering. But it's come a long way since then, and I think they've done a great job going from V4 to V5 here.
Distance and individual assets up close. Just as a demonstration, this is the sort of density you can expect on Microtech today. And in a second, we'll flip over to what you can expect from the new upcoming tech. In a second, we're going to turn on the culling group, Steve-O, so you can see. These are the groups that we create of those trees and of the terrain. And as we get closer, we shrink them so we're more intelligently rendering what we need without having to assess each tree individually, all the way down to the ground.
That's crazy. If they can reach that kind of density in game, holy crap. So now that I showed you that, let's go back to what they're showing as their kind of the vertical slice of what they want planets to look like here. And then we're going to look at the specific biomes they want to start introducing.
just like in real life, oh, thank you.
Just like in real life, getting interrupted by people. All right. Here's a little bit of the differences they're getting from the GPU system rendering they're doing. Honestly, this is going to be so big. Moving so much of this stuff from the CPU to the GPU might actually help us. I think things like when you quantum travel into planets and it hitches, the pop-in that you might get. It seems like a lot of the problems of this game is just how much it uses the CPU. So this update to more GPU-focused rendering and Planet Tech using, you know, our actual graphics-focused hardware should be helpful to optimize the game and make it more stable over whenever they put this in, hopefully. Or maybe it'll allow them to make it more stable as they improve the tech, because generally when they drop in new tech, it's not super stable.
How is this going to handle in your CPU? We don't want to melt anyone's CPU, so we've redesigned all of this tech to work much more efficiently than before, and now it can run on many cores. This allows it to be run perfectly well on both the CPU and the GPU. So we've redesigned our framework so that we can run it at both and swap between them freely. Now, the benefit of this is we can do things like, first off, move the terrain system to the GPU, and we've now done that to get some incredible performance improvements, but we then also cache the results in something we call a virtual terrain texture. I'll give you a quick demo of this now. This is now vastly faster than the previous system, but it also allows us to generate the terrain in much higher resolution, which means all the popping you can see on the mountains as we're approaching, all of that should be completely eliminated on the right-hand side of the screen.
To be quite honest, I cannot notice this that much. I can see some of the popping every time I look, but the first time I saw this, I was like, wait, I can't watch both sides.
With the extra headroom we've gained by making our terrain system more efficient, we've been able to introduce some improvements, including high-resolution ground textures, proper blending between surface types, and of course, better tiling. If you're familiar with any of our planets, we've taken off all the assets so you can see the issue. And now how it looks, you don't see those lines going at all.
I see a little bit of lines. To be quite honest, I don't really notice that much.
One more.
I love to lose the tiling. It's not the most annoying problem, I think, but it does look a lot better here. You can still kind of tell, but it definitely looks much, much better. Like you can't see direct lines going across the ground.
With the terrain data cached on the GPU.
So yeah, it's just some optimization coming with this. It's not just new pretties, it's also just making the old pretties a little more regularly pretty.
Like Ali said, we can perform the scattering there too, which is significantly faster. All those algorithms that we've used to generate those first bits can run there without being more expensive on your CPU. And it also means the results are directly there on the GPU. We can render straight from them. That allows us to have dramatically more density in our new system. We can render objects directly without having to go via the CPU every frame. We also cull at different levels of granularity, with bigger groups in the distance and individual assets up close. Just as a demonstration, this is the sort of density you can expect on Microtech today. And in a second, we'll flip over to what you can expect from the new upcoming tech.
Oh, we already watched this. Okay. Now let's look at the new biomes. We talked about temperature and humidity. We talked about the extremes, high humidity, high temperature, low humidity, low temperature, all the in-betweens. So now they're starting to, because they're getting more granular control over them, introduce more of the assets that actually mark these or match these humidities and temperatures in terms of like the biomes and the assets that come with them. So here's the first, and probably not going to come into the game until we see like Terra, basically. But anyways, the first.
Every planet with realistic environments. And this content is what this phase of Genesis is all about, emergent biomes. For our first example of today, it's almost a shame Will left because it's about moisture, but let's look at very high moisture and medium to high temperature.
Okay, sorry, it's not high temperature. Medium to high. I'd be shooting those Marocs down. God, imagine all of the weird glitches we're going to get from these biomes at first when they're just like randomly showing up in places they're not supposed to be in, like 5 square meter areas. How long till they start selling boats? I mean, the 890 jump is basically just a boat with thrusters on it, right? I think actually ships float now, so technically, there you go. Yeah, I've been told ships float. Gamers murmuring to each other. Ooh, Star Wars reference.
Thanks, that did look really good. So, for swarms, we obviously
got some functionality in here. Again,
not-
just like keep in mind, this is all still very early. This art
we're in the
is
game.
this is white box. Like we are a ways away from this. If you look at the first 4 star systems coming to Star Citizen, let me show you where swamps are going to be. Stanton, obviously no swamps, unless maybe they somehow put some kind of a swamp in on Hurston. I don't know how that would work though. Maybe Microtech? I don't know. Yeah, maybe Microtech. Just not very warm there. So, yeah, I don't know. First system, I don't think so. Second system, obviously not. Third system, no. Fourth system, Cascom possibly, but even then, I feel like Cascom is very high in altitude, so probably less humidity. Castra doesn't even have that kind of stuff going on. Fifth star system, Terra, basically the launch star system for the game, will have swamps. In fact, I think there's like a concept image of a swamp on Terra somewhere. So this is far away. They're just showing where this is headed and kind of the ideas behind it. Just to keep that in mind.
For the water's edge, we made plants like this Alternatera and the iris. We also need the aquatic ones to float on the water surface, like the water lily or the pickerel weed. This willow and the one after, a Chinese tallow tree, while comfortable near water, we can also use to replace some of the more aged assets used to seeing elsewhere in the game. The last one, it's taking a bit longer now, but the last one, I'm gonna wait. The last one, you may not see used much in other biomes, but it's a very iconic one for the swamp, the bald cypress.
So the scale gets pretty big, but much bigger than that as we look at some of the other biomes they're going to have here. Here's some functionality on this one.
As you walk or swim through the water, you may come across obstacles like logs or debris floating on the surface. They will react to the player character and can be pushed out of the way. We were also pleasantly surprised when we first saw how the water simulation systemically affects assets floating on the water surface, making for some really immersive moments.
All right, next biome they were looking at was something just as humid, maybe a little less humid actually, but also quite warm. Now, this is something I could absolutely see on Hurston. We already have savannas on Hurston. And with the redo of Planet Tech, I could see, I mean, there's water, there's seas, there's lakes, there's rivers on Hurston. I think we'll see jungles earlier in the game than swamps for sure. We basically already have jungles. They just don't have that vibe. But the Hurston tree line feels very savanna-ish, jungle-y.
With jungle, example for that. What it means is that you have horizontal layers of microbiomes defined by the species that thrives with the amount of sunlight and rain that still reaches there. The floor, herb and brush layer, we could almost do before, obviously missing the density. But now we also have the option to add variation to the tree layer by dynamically spawning epiphytes like lianas.
This would be incredible if this game gets true full ray tracing at some point way down the future when we can all actually run something like this on our computers. It would be just utterly unbelievable to look up through a jungle like this with this kind of lighting and see like a spaceship flying overhead.
Orchids or bromeliads attached to trunks and canopies of other assets.
Tree houses! Come on. Who would have ever thought I'd be cheering for tree houses in this space game?
May can be referred to as a canvas of a biome. The idea being that we can vary what kind of forest you're in by adding or replacing the plants that visually stand out the most.
There we go.
Now, to get us started on our certification, we made epiphytes like the Epiprenum and the bromeliad, including a potted version for your hab. Then obviously you need jungles for lianas for a jungle. And we also made the grias, which add character to the herb and tree layer.
Yeah, this will be in Terra.
For tall trees, we decided on a fairly generic rubber tree, as its different growth stages serve as a nice foundation for all height levels.
So that scale gets a little higher.
And that's pretty much what we need to make a pretty good base for jungle.
In the jungles. But then we move on to something a little more... I think this is a little lower temperature and a little lower moisture. Let's see how he describes it.
There's a lot of different forests, but we also wanted to use this opportunity to explore extreme scale. And they're just really cool.
Yeah, also just the best trees out there. I think this will be on Microtech. All of these will be in different systems, but I'm just saying where I think we'll see them first. Redwoods are such cool trees. Mrs. Tomato just made a beautiful art piece for our house with some evergreens on them, and they just they get me because it's like they're very redwood looking and they've got the snow on them. I'm a huge sucker for these kinds of trees. Y'all got good redwoods down there, Maverick? Yeah, they really were going in on Star Wars references for this presentation. Hey, there's Morph. Hey, there's GII. Wait, hold on. Hold up. I see GII. Wait, this is like all GII folks. And there's an AAK symbol. Is that AAK? Is that you, dude? I see Skippy there. Yeah, this is all us. There's Walgrit. Hey, representing.
Now, for this one, we first looked at the different redwood biomes on Earth and tried to analyze what the most defining species of them are. With this understanding, we then decided on the following plants to allow for a fairly universal redwood forest that will easily support variation across continents and planets. A fairly common family of species for the ground levels of all redwoods are ferns, in our case a sword fern. We also made a huckleberry variant to provide some visual density for the shrub layer. To add some Jurassic vibes, we made tree ferns, as they can be found in New Zealand redwood forests.
There's your palm trees.
The most
Who
important
was it?
one,
Was it Voodoo that asked for that?
though, obviously sequoias. And they ended up being one of our most complex sets yet.
But
As it
these,
turns
though.
out, they can grow to be fairly ridiculous in size.
Yeah, dude.
It keeps going.
Dude. Love that for us. Freaking love scale. We'll get AAK eventually. We'll get him.
And let the vegetation behave accordingly. Now, as part of our tech improvements, we will be implementing a GPU-based simulation that's fit for our game scale. For now, we've set up the ferns.
Man, with everything needing to depend on GPUs, I really need the market to get itself figured out. Can we please get normal GPU functions going again?
Our existing CPU-based one to better visualize what it will feel like to walk amongst those giants. Also, with the biomes on our planets now being defined by where an individual object wants to appear, you can expect a lot more happy accidents by having species invade different biomes, making for some unique locations, hopefully. Surely. Now, before I get to disappear off stage, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody involved, especially my team in Frankfurt for doing such amazing work and being all around great people.
So,
and also to all of you guys.
I'm thinking we're going to split this into 2 videos, and I'm going to stop this recording here because the next section of this is more about points of interest and not planet tech. So I hope you guys got a little bit more of, I mean, planet tech, the next part is about points of interest using Starchitect, they called it. So it's kind of its own thing, and I think we'll cover that at a different point. It is very interesting, but this one was mainly to show where Planet Tech V5 might be going in the relatively near term, and as far as the planets being made. I think what we're probably going to see is the third system be brought in, and then maybe Planet Tech V5 comes in with that, and they redo everything else on that. I'm not really entirely sure, but I don't think it's really going to be anytime particularly soon. This actually could happen faster, but I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen either because, yeah, I won't say more about that right now.